Hello, this is Mike Burek, your host and producer of Kneditsa, The Well, a podcast series about topics of interest to Ukrainians and friends of Ukraine around the world. Today is Tuesday, December 30th, 2025. This episode is produced for The Ukrainian Weekly, a newspaper published in English for the global Ukrainian community since 1933. Our guest today is Ostap Yarysh, a journalist, author, and a media advisor for the nonprofit organization Razum. Welcome, Ostap. How are you?
Hello, Michael. Thank you for having me. Doing good. Waiting for the New Year's, but yeah, overall doing good. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us today. To start off with, can we get a bit of information about your educational and professional background?
Of course, I studied in Ukraine. I was born and raised there. So I got my BA from Lviv National University of Ivan Franko, got a BA in journalism. And then I had master's degree at Ukrainian Catholic University. I finished School of Journalism there. And after that, I began working as a journalist in Kiev at the Hromadske. So I was working on their foreign desk, covering foreign policy with focus on Europe and the United States. And then in early 2019, I moved to the United States and began working for Voice of America.
And why did you decide to become a journalist? And also, why did you decide to emigrate to the US in 2019?
Well, I guess I've always wanted to be a journalist since I was a kid. I don't know, it was something about telling stories, it was something about covering breaking news or important events. I guess it just always was interesting for me, as a child. And with the United States, it's interesting, in 2018, when I visited the United States for the first time, it was when I covered the midterm elections to the US Congress in 2018 for Hromadske. I guess that here in Washington, D.C., Miroslava Gongadze, who back then was editor-in-chief of the Ukrainian service of Holos America, Voice of America, she noticed some work and she offered me to apply for a job here. She was like, "Hey, we're looking for new people. You seem like a good journalist. Would you like to apply and try your chances?" And I did, and I got a job offer. So I moved to the United States specifically to work for VOA.
So, what was it like being an international multimedia journalist with the Voice of America in Washington, D.C. from 2019 to 2025?
It was fascinating. I got to cover US politics when it came to Ukraine, basically from the first rows, right, of all these events that were unfolding. And obviously, 2019, there was a big story, if you remember. It was the first impeachment of President Trump, and then the second impeachment. We remember that Ukraine was involved in the whole story. It was in the center of all it. So it was a major, major political story, and I was here in Washington, D.C., able to witness everything and cover things from the U.S. Congress, from the White House, um, from other places. And then 2020, of course, the global pandemic and the US was hit hard. I was here also covered that. Then we remember huge racial inequality protests, Black Lives Matter protests. In Washington, D.C., we had big events as well. Then, of course, the election campaign of 2020. So it was like very fascinating to cover all this. And in 2022, when the full-scale invasion of Russia began, obviously it was another level, new scale of events, and Ukraine was everywhere. And I think being there and being able to ask questions again in the Congress and the State Department, and then later at the Pentagon because I was the Pentagon correspondent for Voice of America. I think it was really important for me personally and for Ukrainian audiences because we were there and we could ask those questions that none of the US journalists would ask when it came to Ukraine, right? Because we had some contacts, we had some additional knowledge, and obviously we were interested in some specific things. And being able to go there at the Pentagon or Congress or the State Department and ask these things and then convey them to the Ukrainian audiences, basically being their source of information that was happening here in Washington, D.C., it felt important. It felt also, I felt like big responsibility of asking these questions here and trying to press the Biden administration when it came to aid to Ukraine. When we remember, the Biden administration at times were hesitant of providing some sort of weapons or lifting some restrictions, and being here and pressing them on these specific topics. I think for me as a journalist it was important to do that. So obviously, my work at VOA came at I think crucial times, both for the U.S., for Ukraine, and for of course U.S.-Ukraine relationship.
What happened in 2025 that led to you leaving your position with the Voice of America?
Well, obviously, we all remember that after President Trump got elected for the second time, they decided to move forward with the new policy and cutting government financing and funding and cutting some programs and shutting down some agencies. So ultimately, VOA was shut down and they let a lot of people go who used to work for VOA. So that's why I left, if we can say so. Basically, yes, VOA was shut down, and I don't work there anymore, along with many of my colleagues, not only from the Ukrainian service, but from 48 language services that covered US policy and America's story for audiences abroad.
And what is your new role as media advisor for the nonprofit organization Razum in Washington? And can you briefly describe some of Razum's activities and its history?
Right. Yeah, so after VOA was shut down, obviously, I could not work there anymore. So Razom for Ukraine, it's one of the largest, one of the leading nonprofits based here in the US, focused on helping Ukraine. So they offered me join their team and join their team as a media advisor, given my experience, given my knowledge in my work being as a bridge between the United States and Ukraine. So they offered me join their team in advocacy here in DC. So basically, what we do, and well, advocacy is just one of the fields where Razom operates. Obviously, they have humanitarian programs where they help Ukrainian medics, or they have cultural programs, or they help with rehabilitation for Ukrainian soldiers and other things. But advocacy is very important. That's how Razom and other Ukrainian community organizations try to make impact when it comes to the decisions in Washington, D.C., make good impact for Ukraine. So what I do now, I worked on advocacy public engagement team, which means that we try to engage with the obviously, well, yeah, with the U.S. public outside of the Beltway. Often it comes to working with the American media, basically helping them covering Ukraine. That could be placing op-eds in major US publications. That could be putting them in touch with good people from Ukraine for their stories. That could be helping them with important context for their publications or TV packages or podcasts. That could be doing some media campaigns in states like Florida or Louisiana or Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina. We know those states are important when it comes to policy in the United States because we obviously focus not only in Washington, D.C., but outside of it. In 2025, I remember for me personally, it was super fascinating to be able to go to Alaska when we had the summit or meeting between President Trump and Vladimir Putin. And we knew that practically every US and foreign media would be there, but Ukraine would not be present at the table in Alaska. So we knew that we need to go there to elevate and amplify Ukrainian voices to help American and foreign media cover this story and to make sure that Ukrainian position is heard, is visible. So we went there and we worked intensively with the US media. Some of them we helped with coverage. We helped find local communities in Alaska, Ukrainian communities. Others were interested in expert commentary, and we went live on air with some conservative media like Fox or Newsmax or others because we know that the administration and President Trump listens to those. So that was important. We engaged with local community to connect down with the media. So it was really good to be there, and we saw some results, and we saw positive coverage of Ukrainian positions, of Ukrainian key principles by the American media while in Alaska. So I think that was important. Yeah, basically, if in a nutshell, what I do now, trying to do some media campaigns and amplifying Ukrainian voices in the US media landscape, basically doing media advocacy in the United States for Ukraine.
Who do you think are some of the key advocates for Ukraine in the U.S. government and Congress?
If we look at the U.S. Congress, there are actors from the both sides of the aisle that have been supportive of Ukraine all along, and they still remain. I mean, if we talk about specific names, U.S. Senate Senator Wicker from the Armed Services Committee, steadfast supporter of Ukraine, or Senators Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal, both from Republican and Democratic Party, consistent in their support for the return of Ukrainian abducted children, for the sanctions against Russia, consistent in their calls to elevate and increase pressure on the Kremlin and on Russia's war machine. Obviously, when we go to the House of Representatives, there are also members from both sides of the aisle. Brian Fitzpatrick from Pennsylvania, then Marcy Kaptur from Ohio, from many other states. There's huge Ukrainian presence, Ukrainian diaspora or communities, but not only. I think, in the US Congress, lawmakers in their majority they understand that standing with Ukraine is the right thing to do, and it's a black and white situation where you have to fight evil, and Ukraine fights for its life, for its survival. So there is no way for the US than to stand with its democratic partner and help Ukraine win this war. With the administration, obviously, they have another approach when you compare it to the Biden administration. They want to resolve this war peacefully and put an end to it. Obviously, it comes to the US government, Congress, and more importantly, United States public. I think it's important to understand that Americans in their majority, they support Ukraine, they stand with Ukraine. And I think that's what this administration needs to remember as well. Because when you look at the polls, vast majority of Americans, both Republicans and Democrats, they say they want to increase pressure on Russia, they want more weapons for Ukraine, either provided directly or sold to Europe, and then Europe would provide that to Ukraine. They clearly understand that Russia is an aggressor and Russia should be held accountable for its crimes. And I'm talking about both Republicans and Democrats, and including President Trump's voters as well, people who identify themselves as MAGA Republicans or those who specifically voted for President Trump. They say they want to see more support for Ukraine and more pressure on Russia. So I think when administration comes to dealing with Ukraine and Russia, comes to the negotiation process, they need to remember that their own base want to see more for Ukraine and more pressure on Russia. So I think that's crucial as well.
Ostap, we're just about out of time, but I did want to ask you a final question. Can you briefly summarize what your book is about? This is America, Non-Hollywood Stories, which was published in 2021. And also, do you have any other books planned in the future?
That book was about the United States of America. I traveled across the country, met different people. Obviously, it was intended for the Ukrainian audience. So I tried to tell the story of America, which was not cliche, which was not obvious to Ukrainians, and tell them how things are on the ground. At the same time, choosing stories that are not super obvious or would paint like caricature of the United States. So those were important social and political topics or stories about climate change or immigration or weapons in the United States or drugs or housing issues or racism and other things. Basically, choosing these topics and showing them through the lenses of real people, how they deal with that, about their struggles and hopes and their life stories. I think it was interesting for me as a journalist to travel to these places, meet all these people. And also, I hope it was interesting for the readers to see America from maybe not stereotype perspective, not from, like a Hollywood perspective, because when you talk to people in Ukraine and ask most of them, at least that was the case in 2021, 2020. So what do you think about what do you have in your mind when you think about the United States? You'd often get a question, well, people would imagine New York or like, I don't know, sandy beaches of Miami or Hollywood or Statue of Liberty, like these things that they would see like in the movies or read in the books. So I wanted to show something different, what it is really like here on the ground. I hope I managed to do that. And hopefully I would be able to work on something else. I don't have any announcement yet at this point, but I have something in mind. So potentially there will be more books coming, but we'll see. But we'll see how things go.
We look forward to seeing that. Ostap, thank you so much for joining us today, and a Happy New Year to you.
Thank you so much, Michael, and Happy New Year to you as well.
I have been speaking with Ostap Yarysh, a journalist, author, and media advisor for the nonprofit organization Razum for Ukraine. This episode of Krynytsia was produced for The Ukrainian Weekly, a newspaper published in English for the global Ukrainian community since 1933. And I'm Mike Burek, your host and producer of Krynytsia. Until next time, that's all for now.